Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Native Americans and Philanthropy's January member education session. We're very excited to get into the new year of 2023 and be having these sessions for the rest of the year. We are very excited that this one is going to be a little more focused on our young people and the opportunities that are going to be happening for them in the future and are happening for them right now. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Danielle Frank, and I am currently the Native Youth Coordinator at Native Americans in Philanthropy. I help to facilitate our Native Youth Grantmakers program, where we are connecting with young Indigenous professionals from many, many communities who are community connected and are looking to get an education to help better their community, whatever that may look like. We are very excited that we have 10 up and coming amazing young Indigenous professionals in this program this year. And we are very excited for them to be getting an introduction to philanthropy from an Indigenized lens. I am going to go ahead and pass off next to one of our Native Youth Grantmakers who is actually actively participating in the program. This year, we have been lucky enough for our individuals to join us in DC, California, and we will be excited to have them up at our up and coming NAP conference. So I'll go ahead and pass over to Quinn Smith, one of our Native Youth Grantmakers, and have Quinn share a little bit about his experience.
Thank you, Danielle. Hi, everybody. Chokma, Savoshafat, Quinn, Chakasha Saya, Chatasia. Hi, I'm Quinn, I'm a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation, and I'm also Choctaw. And I am currently doing a fellowship here in Seattle with Nia Taro and the Indigenous Leadership Initiative. And for the past year, I've been lucky and to be able to participate in the Native Youth Grantmakers program. So the program has two really incredible components. One is a series of conferences and workshops where we learn more leadership skills and we learn about the world of philanthropy through an Indigenous lens, which if you know anything about how that wealth was generated is a pretty radical perspective to have and very crucial. And then the other part of it is learning about the grant making process. And we are actually serving as grant reviewers on a team of people to read through grants. And the money is actually going to go to organizations to hopefully make a positive difference. And it's a lot of fun.
Thank you so much, Quinn.
Of course.
We are so excited for all of the amazing folks that we have in our Native Youth Grantmakers program this year. And you can read more about our program on our website under our Native Americans in Philanthropy, under our Native Youth Grantmakers program tab. You can find Quinn's bio and the other 9. Read more about them. They're really amazing individuals, and I couldn't be more excited to share space with them. And I'll go ahead and pass back to some of our moderators to go ahead and get us started with some of the panelists and questions. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We're so excited to be uplifting more opportunities for our young people.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Danielle and Quinn. Happy New Year to the audience. It's been an incredible 2023 with Native Americans in Philanthropy and this series. We're super excited to jumpstart this year actually in a fresh way with hearing from our youth and getting their perspective and how they feel about their initiatives. So thank you very much for that and welcome. And it's so exciting to have young people on board. My name is Steph Poston. I am from the Pueblo of Sandia, and I support NAP in being a moderator for these monthly sessions. So to get us started, I'd like to invite our panelists up. The first one being Kelley Mitchell. Kelley, if you can come up and introduce yourself, please.
Hello, everyone. Yate, Kelley Mitchell, Yanishia, Tachine, Nishle, Kitlachini, Bashichin, Todachini, Dashiche, my Dishkizi Dashinale. My name is Kelley Mitchell. I am the program officer for the American College Fund, and I support the College Access and our Student Success program.
Welcome. The next panelist is Dr. Amanda Tachine.
Hi, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending upon where you're tuning in from. She'eya mada tachini inishia, nanish eja tachini nishla, islana bashichin, tkama dashiche ado, anshihia dashanella, look anti edenasha, gotego zenishla. I'm so excited to be here and be in great conversation with everybody. Thank you to NAP for creating such a generative conversation. My name is Amanda Tachine. I'm currently faculty at Arizona State University on the lands of the Acoma O'odham and Peepash peoples.
Our other panelists I will call up, thank you for that. I will call up Vernon Miller.
Hello, my name is Vernon Miller. I'm from the Omaha tribe of Nebraska, originally from Macy, Nebraska. I'm currently in Boston, Massachusetts, and I've been in the field of education for over 19 years and higher education for the past 7 years. So I'm excited to be here, and I'm currently the program manager for Indigenous Leadership Initiatives with the Native Americans in Philanthropy.
Brother Vernon, a fellow Americans for Indian Opportunity ambassador, welcome. Our other panelist is Tesia. If she'll come up to the stage, please.
Bojo Jayak, Tesia Zientek and Dejnakas, Shajakwi National Bay Noswin, Shawnee, Oklahoma, and Doshpia, Oklahoma City, Adayan, Mako and Dodem, Nishnawbe and Dow. Hello, everybody. My name is Tesia Zientek. I am originally from Shawnee, Oklahoma, but I live in Oklahoma City now. I am a citizen Potawatomi and Bear Clan. I have worked within tribal education for the last decade, and now am excited to serve as the Senior Director of Programs for ACES, or the American Indian Science and Engineering Society. And it's wonderful to be with you all today. Miigwech. Thank you.
As you can see, we have an amazing panel list, and I'm just so thankful each of you could join. I know each of you will bring an amazing perspective and really add some depth and to the conversation. So I'd like to get us started, and I'll first ask Vernon the first question. Is indigenizing higher education is imperative, but often must be approached from multiple perspectives within such an intricate system. How would you define indigenizing the space and the role you play in doing so?
Sure. So what I took for me when I joined higher education as a former teacher, and oftentimes when you think about the curriculum that we were as students and now as a teacher, it didn't reflect who our identities were as Indigenous people. And that's because the books were not written by Indigenous people. I was a business teacher. And so for me, when I thought about business, entrepreneurship, economies, we were the first, economists, the first business people, the first entrepreneurs of these lands. And so for me, I made sure when I was teaching certain lessons or what was expected to be taught according to standards, I would definitely make it relevant for my students, thinking about our community, thinking about, how this is applicable, thinking about the real history of some of the economies that we held and are continuing to hold. But when it comes to higher education specifically, I really enjoyed the experience at Tufts University, being able to create the Indigenous community and create an Indigenous center for our students that were at Tufts. And so for me, that really relied on the students. I had an idea based on my higher education journey, what I needed, but that was definitely a decade before the students who are today in the school systems and in the higher education spaces. So for me, I wanted to really ask them what was relevant for you, but also being mindful of where we're at. We are in, Wampanoag lands, Massachusetts lands. And so for us, there's a lot of pretendings out there. There's a lot of things that are appropriated. So I wanted to make sure when we created our space, we really honored the local communities that were here, but also in addition to that, making sure that the space itself was reflective of our communities and not from a past tense. Oftentimes when you think of Indigenous and Native people, what you see is typically from the past, are black and white. So for us, it was really allowing our community to be vibrant and showing our current roles that we have in our communities, but also in higher education and at Tufts specifically. So I enjoyed being able to, when we bought textiles and we bought artwork, we created our library. We made sure that we were supporting Indigenous, Native owned businesses, artists, creators. And so we wanted the space to really reflect also who we are today and the interests of the students. So I was in Albuquerque, and they have this amazing exhibit going on where they were taking the decks of skateboards and they were painting those decks. And so I love that idea. And a lot of our students today are skateboarders. So this is one example of, I put up one of those skateboards here at the center when I was there, and the students loved it because they embraced that part of their interest that they had, but also just showed the relevancy of who we are today. It doesn't show us a black and white image of a chief with a war bonnet on. And so I really enjoyed that. And also just the issues that were impacting us today, whether it's in Hawaii with Mauna Kea, to things that were happening and still are happening with pipelines, to things that are happening across the world. When you think of Indigenous, I always think of an international lens, what it's like for our students who are acknowledging, reclaiming being Indigenous from their countries, who have often been told they can't. And so for me, it's how are they reflected here? I want to make sure that when you come to the space, you feel welcome. And so for me, that's how I made sure that we defined the space, was based off of the interests of the students, the relevancy, and also the representation that we're going to have of non-Indigenous people come to our space.
Thanks, Vernon. I really liked the skateboard and how you expanded upon that. Thanks for your response. Same question directed at Tesia. Indigenizing higher education is imperative and must be approached from multiple perspectives within very complicated systems. How would you define indigenizing the space and the role that you play now?
Absolutely. I think particularly in the ACES context, when we're thinking about STEM, we encourage all of our professionals and students that we work with to really remember that we come from the first scientists. So when we're thinking about indigenizing the space, it's not, we're not trying to become a part of a system that we weren't already a part of. A lot of the Western science now, that we draw upon was built on Indigenous knowledge. So first of all, it's that grounding, that understanding that what is often referred to as traditional knowledge is also modern knowledge, and is also something that we can be proud of, and is a way to really emphasize that we belong in these spaces, and they are our spaces just as much as anyone else's. So I think that's one thing at ACES that we find very, very important. And then if I'm thinking about ACES, the national nonprofit, or in my role as president of the National Indian Education Association, we're also thinking about all of the different places that in levels that our tribal students, that our Indigenous students are impacted by. So thinking from the local space, so when you're thinking about students who are preparing for higher education, how are parents committees, school board leaders, parents and guardians, youth themselves, how are they involved in that conversation? And then you're thinking about the folks who are at the higher education level. You're thinking about any kind of local nonprofit that might grassroots advocacy organizations. And then you have your national nonprofits that are trying to weave all of those things together, like ACES or National Indian Education Association or the Tribal Education Department's National Assembly. So there are all these levers, and I understand how that can be daunting for higher education individuals and spaces to think about how can I include all of these voices, but it really is important that all of these different circles of community are considered, and that when conversations about how to make a space reflective of the Indigenous people who will be in it, that those voices are captured in some way. So whether that's through a survey or a focus group or whatever the case may be, the more voices that are involved in that process, that's a really, really important place to start. And really, I think that just comes down to relationship building, which is in itself Indigenous. So I loved the example that Vernon shared. And I think really drawing upon the local can be important, but I also encourage folks to think about all of those other circles of community as well.
Yeah. The minute you said STEM and how we have so much of that in our history, immediately I thought of Chaco and our ancestors from Chaco and the amazing scientists and geniuses that they were. So thank you for bringing that perspective. I'd like to direct the same question to Dr. Amanda Tachine. Did you need a indigenizing higher education is important. And how do you define indigenizing the space and role from where you come from?
Yeah, thank you for the generative question. I feel like this question in of itself could carry on for a long time, right? And I feel like Vernon and Tesia both set the tone and the rhythm of what does it mean for us. I am lucky I get to work alongside college students, and it's just been an honor. And I think one of the things that I tell myself and I tell them is just be who you are. Because I think sometimes when we think about Indigenous in our brains, we're fixated on one way to be Indigenous. And I feel like when we get caught up on that, then we don't recognize we're redefining harm with each other because, you're not how I'm seeing how to be Indigenous, or I'm not seeing how I think I should be Indigenous. And so I think then it's really like having open conversations with each other about, who are we and how do we create communities of belonging in these places that sometimes we feel like we don't. And so for me, it's really just having some really honest conversations with folks, but also recognizing and reminding myself that who I am is important and that I come from a strong people and that we are changing and dynamic in all the ways. I can listen to Tupac and I'm Native. I think it's important for us to be recognizing the fluidity of who we are. And so I feel like in that case, I feel like I'm Indigenous in all the ways I am all the time, whether I'm in higher ed, I'm at Safeway, at the grocery store, or wherever I am. And I think it's important for us to do that, especially with our young people, because I feel like our young people are often questioning that. And it can be really damaging in the way that we create conceptions of belonging and the way we treat each other. So I love the relationship conversation because I think that's at the heart of Indigenous ways. How we treat each other, how we treat the land, and it's ongoing building those relationships and so forth. So it may feel like a general answer, but I really feel like it's really profound if we think about let's accept each other the way we are, knowing that we're ongoing and learning how to be our truest self and the way of learning what that means for us as Indigenous peoples.
Great perspective. Thank you for that. Same question to Kelley.
Yeah, absolutely. Fellow panelists, what they shared is definitely really key points. And one thing I did want to add was that with our programming with American and College Fund, and when we work with our scholars, I work with my team on focusing on that relationship building and trust, because again, that's very important. And when you're working with, Native students of all ages, really, but also transparency and consistency, because there's so much in the history of, our Native history that we don't have that transparency or consistency. But coming at it on the higher educational space and letting the students know that we are here to support them, that they belong here, that they can succeed and accomplish whatever their goals are in higher education is very important. And then also putting a name to the face, or putting a face to the name, either way, yeah, you can do whichever one, but really just being visual is a big key thing for our scholars and the work that we do when we are trying to really support our students through their educational journey.
Thank you for that. Yeah, you all had some really great answers from your own perspectives. Thank you for that. The next question, and I will start with Tesia this time. Cultural and formalized education can sometimes look drastically different when we actively participate in each respectively. How, if any, have you seen the shift in your career or research?
Absolutely. And I love the point, and I want to kind of ground this response in the point that Dr. Tachine made about each person being, indigeneity kind of manifesting itself differently in each person, because different people are connected to their cultural backgrounds in different ways, depending on what their family history might be through no fault of their own. So there are some folks who are blessed with the opportunity to have grown up in a culturally grounded way, and those who are coming to it much later. So when I'm thinking about my experience in education or the students that I've worked with, I think that's something to take into account so that students do not feel ashamed if the only type of education they've ever experienced is formalized education and they don't have that cultural education to compare it to. Or there are others who are more familiar and more comfortable within, that cultural side of education. So I just want to emphasize that point that indigeneity looks very different because we have a complicated history with a lot of efforts to destroy our cultural connection, and that has had different impact on folks. However, I think at ACES, what we really, really want to do is to blend those two things as much as possible and really start from the idea of thinking about our Indigenous ways of knowing and then making that accessible and making our programs start from that place. So when we're developing curriculum, for example, and we're working with a specific community, we're thinking about what do they know about their culture? And what do we know about their lands that they're on, and how can we approach STEM in that way? One great example that one of our curriculum developers, Stacy Ledford-Smith, came up with when she was working with the Onondaga Nation is knowing that one of their ways is to gather leeks. And so she was working with the students with these little round sphero robots and helped them map what it would be like to go up the mountain to gather those leeks. So it's thinking about what those students may or may not know about their culture, and maybe also helping them to feel connected to that, while also thinking about, okay, we're wanting these students to be able to succeed in a modern context as well, and they're going to need to know maybe some robotics, some computer science, and this is a way to help them feel connected. So really, I think it is about understanding that it's an individualized approach depending on what students or what space you're in, and then thinking about, is there a way to come from these values and then express those values as an Indigenous way, less so than thinking, well, this is what Native American culture means broadly. It's more, I think, from that value standpoint, in my opinion. So, any question?
Yeah, thanks for that. If I could have Dr. Tachine answer that question as well.
Absolutely. I love that response. Wow. God, this is such a great group. Yeah. This is one of my favorite questions that you all asked us to think through, because it's actually a story of where I encountered it. And in terms of when I was doing my doctoral research, I had a moment where I felt like giving up because I had to present my research design. That's the fancy word for them to say that this is what I'm going to do. And you have to read all these methods books, these research design books on explaining how you're going to answer the question you're interested in. And I was literally sitting in the living room with these piles of books, all by non-natives, because I didn't have any native instructors to teach me about Indigenous methodology. And I remember feeling I don't know if I can do this. This doesn't feel right with me. And I had, at the same time in my life, I was learning how to weave Navajo textiles. My mother-in-law, beautiful woman, Alta Wanika, was teaching me how to weave. And so I had a loom at my home that my father-in-law made for me. And long story short, there was prayers in there. And I feel like my ancestors were talking to me. Even that, for some people, were thinking, oh, that's kind of weird. But for us, there's teachings involved in that. but I really felt like I was told to do my research like I'm weaving a rug. And all of a sudden it just clicked in my brain. And I remember like I was sitting on my couch, I had my laptop open and I was crying and I just started typing and I started creating what I ended up developing called story rug methodology. Story rug. And so then it's really connecting the ways of storing and weaving with research. And then I was like, this is it. This is a way in which we can acknowledge and assert just what everyone's saying, that our people are researchers and that they're theorists. And Spider Woman, who's a pivotal being in our stories as Navajo, Spider Woman before Spider-Man, Marvel, I'm just letting you know, just shouting out that also. But that Spider Woman was a researcher and a theorist. And that was so empowering for me. And that was the moment that I like, you know what, we can do this. And so so that's Indigenous research methodology, using Diné knowledge system to ground the way I think about research. And now I love to talk about that with students and others because it gives us creativity, because we're creative people. Just like the skateboard as an example. We have ingenious ways of including our Indigenous knowledge and Western knowledge. And it allows for others to see possibilities that they didn't realize. Oh, we can write books on methods now. I can join the pile that I was reading years ago and start talking about it. So it really instills this possibility that I think is really exciting. And so that's why I love this question. I love talking about methods, and I can see the power of that and the way it acknowledges the intelligence and brilliance of our people.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that personalized story and your vulnerability and getting a little discouraged, but finding your way through your own culture was beautiful. So thank you for sharing that with us. Kelley, what are your thoughts on how you see this shift in your career and research when it comes to drastically looking at things different?
Yeah, hearing the different stories are the responses right now, just focusing on what my experience came through was through tribal colleges and universities. That's a big thing with my background for sure. Because grew up in, urban, a city, and realized I did not have that connection and that kind of could not see myself in the leadership at those different schools. So then when I went to a tribal college, that totally shifted. While at the local university here, I was not able to connect with people. Like, they weren't getting me, I wasn't getting them. So then when I went to a tribal college, it was totally a different experience. My mind was blown. So like majority of the work that we do at the American Indian College Fund, we do focus our supports with the 35 different tribal colleges across the nation. And so the tribal colleges really focus on their achieving the goals of formalized education, but then they also have the ability to incorporate that cultural aspect, which is not just in the academic sense, but also in the environment. Because as we're going through education, and like for our previous question, it's really about the holistic approach, right? It's really about the whole being of an individual and where they're coming from. So if you have an environment that fully supports who you are as a person, and doesn't judge you as the person you show up on the first day, but they understand you do have a history, you do have ties to your community and your family. And that was just such a powerful shift and support system that I found in the tribal college and university spectrum. So that was really neat to see that. And it's really neat to see it as we go on with, our career and our research, that the more of a tolerance between that with the tribal colleges for sure. So that's what I had to share with that one. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. I think, Vernon, if you'll want to add to the question?
Yeah, so when I think about the formalized part of education, I was talking about relevancy earlier and how do we create spaces, but also in that education part of it, in that journey, how do we ensure that it's relevant for what our students and our youth really are genuinely interested in doing? As I was going through the K-12 process of my educational journey, it was always told to me, you're going to go to college. That's the path that you're on. But what I love is seeing this trend today. When I lived in my community, I also served on a school board. And so I was able to, as a former teacher in that school system as well, I had a lens of, okay, what was working, what wasn't working, what needs weren't being addressed by our students. And a lot of that is their paths. For some reason, we want to just tell everyone you're going to go to a 4-year college, and I love, what we're talking about, the TCUs, but there's opportunities available oftentimes that we're not aware of how we're pushing different pathways when our students, they want to live home. They want to have that cultural component a part of their lived experiences. And part of that is being able, what opportunities are available to them that's going to encourage that and foster that and not encourage our community members to leave. So part of that was when I was on the school board, we really reflected on, how are we making sure that the K-12 experience is relevant for them and prepping them for whatever they want to do after that. Sure, it could be a 4-year college, it could be a 2-year college, it could be a tribal college, but also it could be vocational school, it could be cosmetology school. And so an initiative that we were beginning talking about when I was on a school board was the vocational component, the career pathways that we were offering at the high school level to our community. And at Omaha Nation, we just opened up last year our career academy. It's one of the first in Nebraska that's a native focused emphasis in terms of what pathways are specific to our community. Now when students are in high school, in the career academy, they can get their CNA. They can start looking at early childhood pathways. They can look at construction management. They can also look at culinary arts, entrepreneurship. Those are all pathways that are really relevant for our rural communities, also urban communities. But what Omaha Nation does is they offer a career academy that they can really explore. It's called Against the Current. And it really embraces that cultural component of who we are, because Omaha means against the current. And so for us, we're going against the current because we don't have to all be expected to go to a 4-year college or a university. And so we're identifying that when they're in their K-12, journey, and being able to really foster that and support that and really just embrace, not everyone has to go to college to get a bachelor's degree. So I love the pathways that it's creating. Our community members were always wanting to be welders. They wanted to be electricians and plumbers. Now they have that opportunity in the high school setting to really develop that skill early on. So when they want to go on, they can get that certification, get an associate's, whatever formalized, degree they need in order to operate in that space. And so for me, I see that as a shift. Hopefully that's a trend that's going to be more applicable to our communities, and really making sure that relevancy is a part of that journey, not only at the higher ed step, but also right before that, and really fostering their pathway to be however what it is for that student, that family, and that community. So I really appreciate how that trend is becoming more apparent now.
Thanks, Vernon. Wow, all great responses. I learned so much. Thank you. For our next question, I'd like to welcome to our digital stage. I'd like to welcome back Quinn Smith. If you will come up and ask the next question.
Sure. Yes. So thank you so much, everybody, for your insightful and thoughtful responses to these really wonderful questions. So one of the first question that I have for y'all is there any advice that you have for young Indigenous leaders about how to operate within colonized educational spaces? So I just graduated from a PWI, and it was incredibly difficult and filled with just as much activism as it was academics. So be curious to hear your thoughts on strategies of how to operate within a context like that.
Let's start with Kelley.
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing that comes to mind is really, which is confidence and self-advocacy. That's where I think that, as young Indigenous leaders, confidence is a key role, because as going through the process of higher education and then even into the career aspect after higher education, confidence is that I'm coming at it in a perspective of that you are where you're supposed to be, and that you can get to that point and where you want to go. No one should ever doubt that they don't belong there, even if it is at a TCU or non-TCU. You belong there. You got yourself to that point. Continue on. Self-advocacy in that sense of ask questions. Again, like that confidence, it's a tough one, because in reality of going to school and getting out of that comfort of high school support is that there's going to be no's. There's going to be denials. There might be a low grade, but if you pursue through your education and your goals, that confidence will build. That confidence will get you to that next stage of life. And then that advocacy is really showing that, don't be afraid to ask questions. I did a little bit of teaching in with a high school group with a Native American Community Academy, and with their high school students. And then, I would always share like that same statement that I'm pretty sure a lot of people got as they're going through school, is that if you have a question, someone else has that question as well. So that's where that self-advocacy comes in, because it's unfortunate to hear those stories where students, and also Indigenous students, where they didn't have that same support in somewhere space. But you can see the drastic difference between having that role model and then not that role model, where you see the different stories kind of take place. So definitely confidence and self-advocacy.
Tesia, you want to Great.
Oh, yeah, I love that advice that you shared, Kelley. And I think my response to this, my initial response to this is really similar to the one of the earlier questions, is that is really focusing and centering relationships. So finding your community. And I went to college out of state at a college that was built on my tribal lands, but is a PWI, predominantly white institution. And so, if your community is not, if you're far away from home and you can't be participating in your tribal community, maybe it's finding a Native American club or group on campus. Maybe it's looking to the local tribes in your area, or maybe it's just building relationships with folks that you can relate to. In my undergraduate experience, I ended up becoming very close to a lot of folks in the international community, because they were experiencing a lot of the same sort of imposter syndrome or outsider feelings that I was feeling, and we were able to relate over that, even if they weren't, Native American or from my own tribal community. So I think really building those communities and finding those relationships that you can go to when you're feeling frustrated in a colonized education space, because those moments will come. But if you can go to somebody and vent or say, oh my goodness, am I crazy that really frustrated me and upset me? And it sort of is grounding to realize that you're not the only one that feels that way, and that there are others who can help, just be a sounding board or help support you through that. And then also, I think really, if you are an Indigenous person who's connected to your cultural ways or open to learning them, thinking about how can you draw upon that knowledge in your daily life? So maybe that's smudging, or in our Anishinaabe way, greeting the day and putting down tobacco, or calling upon your ancestors or channeling them in certain situations. All of those things are things that we may have been taught growing up, and sometimes it feels it can be hard to remember that we still have those tools and those resources in a space that does not feel designed for them. But we bring those with us anywhere. We bring that knowledge, that those ancestors, those communities with us wherever we go. And so taking the time to draw upon that is, for me, has been extremely comforting and helps me realize that being in a colonized space, that isn't normal. And so I can bring my full self and what I know. And it always helps me remind me that my way of doing things is just as good. Our way of doing things is just as good, if not better, than these ways of doing things. And it's completely valid. So anyway.
So I think on my end, I have two pieces of advice. The first thing is non-native, non-indigenous people call it, self-care. But for us, it's how do you remain balanced? How do you make sure that you're centered? How do you address your physical, your mental, your emotional, and your spiritual needs? And that looks different for everybody. There is no monolith of how we're supposed to take care of ourselves. It's all individualized, and it's all really relevant to who you are and what your journey is. So that looks different for everybody. Some of us use corn pollen, to find our spiritual balance. Some of us use cedar, some of us use tobaccos, sage. It's whatever is relevant for you and what part of your cultural practice. And so also physically, emotionally, it's going to be very emotionally draining to be in very white spaces. There's going to be a lot of microaggressions that will happen, but it's how do you react to those? How do you bounce back? How do you remember how resilient your ancestors were and those lessons that have been given to you by your relatives, whether it's your parents, your grandparents, remembering those lessons as you're embarking on the journey that you're on in higher education. So for me, it's remembering how do you stay balanced and what does that look like for you? And the next thing is, for me, it's in addition to finding a community, is finding a mentor. In the PWI that I went to as an undergrad, unfortunately, there were no professors who looked like me or reflected my identity. And so my mentors in undergrad and grad school were typically non-native and non-indigenous, but that was impactful for me because they had been through that experience. They were both people of color, but they were also impactful because they knew how to navigate, those white spaces. And for me, I could be vulnerable with them, share about, how professor's grade or how professor's comment or feedback impacted is what I'm feeling valid, but it always is. It's how you react to that. It's how do you find balance? And also remembering that, they're teaching from a very settler colonial mindset. They are not teaching from an indigenous mindset and how it has impacted our communities and what those decisions and what the lessons have created and often perpetuated. And so remember that, your mentors may not look like you, but if you can find a mentor who reflects your experience, I think that's the most best part of that advice that I would give, in the spaces that you're a part of. I know when I was in grad school, there was another indigenous professor, Dr. Redcourt at Kansas State. And so he wasn't in my department, but he was a great resource for me when things were happening, that I could just be vulnerable and share and get his feedback. And like I said, helping me navigate, helping me develop next steps moving forward, and really being that support system that you need, because oftentimes you're going to be away from family. And so you have to find your family from the friends and those around you that are at your institution. So try to find a balance, be centered, and find mentors in your community that you're developing as you go on your higher ed journey.
Wow, y'all are incredible advice. I think to build off of what you all are sharing is, I had the privilege of writing a book that's centered on 10 college students and their journey. And I use the language of weapons, like what weapons did they use to navigate through, I call these monsters that are operating all the time, trying to take away our brilliance. And one of the weapons that was really powerful is the weapon of refusal. And this is from Aja Simpson, who's written about refusal. It's the idea that this person will talk about you in this way, that person will talk about you in that way, and then that person will talk about you in that way. But I have the determination, the self-determination, the sovereignty to refuse how people are talking about me, because I can make the decisions of who I am. That's a really powerful weapon, because all of what we're sharing is really wonderful strengths of helping you sustain the many times when you're going to be told or seen some way that damages your brilliance. And it might be your own self-talking, like, I'm not smart enough, I'm not Native enough. I'm too big enough. All of these things we tell ourselves, we can refuse those messages. And so I encourage you to acknowledge that that's a gift. It's a gift to say, no, I'm going to be a brilliant, intelligent person of who I am destined to be. Or if you're encountering something racism, racist faculty, because that will happen, you have the power to refuse what they're saying, meaning like, I don't have to listen to this. Like, I do not have to also then internalize what you're thinking are of me. And I think that's a weapon we don't talk about enough that is really powerful, because our ancestors refused time and time again. And now we have the power to continue with that weapon and sharpen it to refuse, because we can determine what our lives are. We can determine our futures. And so I encourage you to activate the refusal weapon. Yeah.
Thank you so much, everybody. I'm just really struck by how each of you touched on such an important component to this. The weapon of refusal, the making sure that you're taking care of your spiritual well-being, the fact that you belong there, finding your community. I remember for me, I was fortunate enough to, my first experience at college was, we had this visiting professor, Myron Dewey, who was an incredible documentarian, documented No Dapple. He's since passed on. But one of the things that he told us while we were there is he had us look out the window at all this crazy Gothic architecture. And it was, by far the furthest I'd ever been away from home. And he made us look out the window and stare out for a while. He's like, this institution was built to eradicate Indigenous people, but you're here and you can change that. And it's no mistake that you're here. And having that grounding, the first time I ever went to a college, the furthest I was away from home, really just carried me through all of those 4 years. So, and I think it just resonates with so much of what you guys said. So moving on to the next question, meaningful inclusion of Indigenous youth and their perspectives is something that NAP seems to appreciate and value, given my experience as a member of the Native Youth Grantmakers cohort. What are your respective organizations doing, or what have they done to invest in the next generation now? And if we could go over to Kelley first, that would be great.
Yeah. So with the American Indian College Fund, we've been focusing on a couple of things. So we are working with our college access side, where we are supporting about 60 high schools and partner Native organizations near tribal community. I can't even think. Tribal colleges and universities and on and off reservations. So this grant is really focusing on supporting that college access. We've also provided, which Dr. Tachine worked on as well, which is our college going guidebook. So it's a really amazing guidebook that we provided that walks through the process of what it's like to go to college, how to prepare, what are questions that parents might have, what does it look like to go to oh my goodness, I am sorry, going to like a college fair. So it's all those things that kind of focus in on that, because again, everyone has the opportunity and the ability to go to college. And even if it's, reflecting kind of to what the last question was asked, was like, no matter what that journey looks like, you can still go to college and wherever you jump in and on that journey. Then we also are working with our first year programming. This is something that we've been focusing on. Gradually, every year we can implement new ways, because part of our process is that we evaluate and we survey our students to ask to we really survey our students to create that, holding that space for our scholars, because it's incorporating their voice. This was said previously because it's important to hear. I mean, we can tell students on the daily basis what to do, but our goal is to hold space for students and to get feedback and hear what they need and what they want. So with that process, we've created a first year programming that really focuses on like, what do you need to prepare to get to school? You know, think about like, oh, you're going to go to Salish Kootenai College. So then how far is that and how much gas do you need to get that prepared? Because that's part of the reality of this, is looking at the whole span of it, right? The whole experience of the student. What does that look like for them? Because it's easy for them to say, yeah, let's go there. But in reality, it's like, well, let's see, can you ask your aunties? You can ask your uncles, you know, can they all help you move to that school? So that's part of the process that we're really working on. And then also mental wellness. That's something that we've really incorporated into our programming, because we understand the reality, especially from the push of the pandemic, and looking at that, because us as Native Indigenous people, we're a community and we work with one another. But when we were isolated, it took a big toll and impact. And so that's something that we're really focusing on as well, is trying to normalize that mental and cultural wellness, so that they are, again, falling back on that holistic approach of how can we really support the whole student into the journey and what they want to achieve.
I love that, and that I want to start to talk about for a brief moment what the National Indian Education Association, NIEA, is doing, I think, to help invest in this next generation. And that organization is doing a lot of amazing things, but Kelley, you talking about that holistic approach, that whole student approach, really reminds me of a big initiative at NIEA right now, which is the Whole Child Initiative. So really thinking about, and they're doing that through this great program through tribal communities and schools. So they're working with these sites to talk about and to work with students to determine, what do you need beyond, you know, what barriers might there be that are keeping you from learning today? You know, can we help you by providing, you know, any kind of clothing or food or mental health resources? And so really helping to make sure that student is fully cared for in a way that then allows them to focus and bring their best and most complete and balanced self to learn. So that's, you know, National Indian Education Association is doing a lot of wonderful things, but I think that Whole Child Initiative is particularly special. And then in my day job at ACES, we have several different initiatives where we're really trying to invest in that next generation. Within programs specifically, we have our pre-K-12 department, which is focused on curriculum development and partnerships with local schools to give them resources, training, to introduce their students as young as middle school to STEM and get them excited about what that might look like from an Indigenous perspective. Then we also have our student success department, which is headed up by Dr. Johnny Pula. And he's amazing. That department focuses on scholarships, internships, and webinars. So they're really investing in the student to make sure that they have those resources, but they're also working with them to really help them feel engaged. They're celebrating what Johnny has termed the Tatsanupi of the month. It's the Comanche word for star. So who's the star of the month? So we're celebrating those students and lifting them up for the great things that they're doing. in that program, as well as offering mentorship opportunities. And then sort of the next link in that chain is the Research and Career Support Department, which is led by Dr. Tiffany Smith. And that department has professional organizations in society. So they're bringing together these women in STEM, or it might be environmental focused people, and helping them build a network of their peers to learn together, to vent together, whatever the case may be, and grow together. And then we also have this wonderful program called Lighting the Pathway that Brittany Anderson leads, which is trying to help people who are help people become faculty, Indigenous faculty within STEM. So we know that we're so underrepresented there, but we know who these folks are, and if they've hopefully at ACES, maybe they've grown with us through these other departments and these other programs, and now they're ready to become somebody in this higher education space who can come from an Indigenous perspective. So they're receiving mentorship through that program and other support and resources to help them hopefully become Indigenous faculty that sort of change that experience for the next generation that's coming up. So a lot happening at ACES, a lot happening at NIEA that I think is really exciting right now, and I'm so honored to be a part of that work, and I'm especially excited to see what this next generation, imagines and dreams and helps become reality.
So I'm excited because I am at Native Americans in Philanthropy and in the program manager for Indigenous Leadership Initiatives. And one of those programs is the Native Youth Grantmakers. I'm excited at some of the progress that's being made. I also have really enjoyed the collaborations we're seeking out, through the Grantmakers attending the White House Tribal Youth Forum, back in the last season. We've reached out to the Fresh Tracks program and the Aspen Institute, and we're creating some collaborative spaces and discussions. And so, like I said, being able to really foster inclusion, foster even more ways to, build relationships, not only within the Grantmakers, but also beyond that, and finding opportunities to really find commonalities and interests in your higher education journeys. At the Americans in Philanthropy, we're going to be launching another initiative soon and developing, Indigenous leadership values and processes for your next level beyond college. So stay tuned for that. That'll be announced soon. But from a personal level, I just, as a former tribal leader, I really wanted to encourage all of you as well to be mindful of, what does your journey look like? As Indigenous people, we're always thinking about the we. We're not constantly thinking about the me. We're also thinking seven generations ahead, because 7 generations ago, people have thought about us and the impacts of their decisions. And so I really want to encourage all of you to really think about what your journey looks like after college, after you step into your career or careers. Think about giving back. Think about how can you redistribute the knowledge and the experiences that you've had. Oftentimes when we go away to college and we come back, we're expected to be leaders. We're expected to take on leadership roles. And sometimes that may look different for everybody, but, use your experiences. If you're asked to step into a tribal leader role, think about how you can make an impact. For me, I was really radical because I saw my role as a tribal leader as somebody who was here to govern, not to manage. If we were going to use our tribal governance structure, we would not have a democracy in all reality. While I appreciate the history of democracies in other Native communities, I know my community, that's something that we wouldn't have used, but that's what we're using today because that's what we are being forced to do. So for me, it's really embracing, I guess, the role that you assume, but also being mindful of what does that look like? What are you modeling for those that are looking up to you now as somebody who's come back to the community? How can you be a mentor to others as well? Because like I mentioned earlier, find mentors on your journey. How can you mentor others in high school? How can you mentor others that are in colleges or in vocational schools now? And sometimes mentorship is just being present, just being available, being someone who they can vent to, someone who has been through what they're about to embark on. So for me, I just really wanted to encourage you, as you're considering, what organizations are out there to how you can support them, whether that's volunteering and also maybe giving back in a way if you're able to do that. So like I said, everyone's journey is different, but just be mindful of the values that we hold through relationships and reciprocity and redistribution and what that looks like for you as you decide to what you want to do after your higher education journey is completed.
Thank you for that, Vernon. Got me all pumped up. So good. I want to say y'all come to Arizona. There's really wonderful things happening here in this beautiful state. I work at ASU, and we have a lot of cool stuff happening. And I just want to highlight one that you all can access now through the leadership with Dr. Brian Brayboy, who is no longer ASU, is now, they're lucky he's at Northwestern University. When he was here, we developed the first ever college magazine by and for Native students, and it's called ASU Turning Points. Now it's an award-winning magazine, has received multiple awards, but the writers, I want to underscore that the writers are Native youth college students writing about the issues that they face. So there's one cool one where students actually wrote about what it really costs to be in college. If you lived in a residence hall, if you lived in a 1-bedroom apartment, or if you lived at home. And they broke it down and even had pictures of how they decorated their room, and then talked about the exact prices, because that's the stuff we sometimes are demystified until you're figuring out your cell phone bill, not realizing it costs this much. So that's the type of stories that this is occurring in this ASU Turning Points. And it's just an example of the way working alongside y'all brilliance allows us to do some really remarkable things. And so I encourage you all to check out all of the events and the programs that everybody spoke about, because they're all going to only connect you to something else. I think that's what's the beauty of these things, is you go and do ACES thing, and then, you find out about this thing, and then you find out about this thing, and you build your relationship along the way. And so there's so much wonderful things, and I just am so grateful to be a part of this. And I wish I could be around youth more. I really, hearing all these programs my heart misses that so much. So I'm going to keep it short and sweet and say, check out ASU Turning Points. It's a wonderful manuscript magazine. It's online. They have a podcast. It's really remarkable. And that's just one teaser of the wonderful things that's happening in Arizona.
Thank you so much, everybody, for your responses. Makes me think of my grandfather, who was born and raised in our tribal capital of Ada, Oklahoma. And I think even though there's so much diversity among Native nations, I think we share a holistic view of the world and ourselves. And that was true with my grandfather. And unfortunately, he didn't have the resources. Now the Chickasaw Nation offers an abundance of educational resources, but he had a very bad experience within Western education and never went back. And luckily for him, he was a genius. But it would have been great to have had those resources early on, I'm sure. So thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah. Great information. I was just super excited hearing all the passion. Quinn, great job. I think you brought Myron Dewey and that experience and how it was really powerful and carried you. That was amazing. I think many of us know him and respect the work that he did. And when teachers can leave students with that kind of experience, it's really powerful and can get them through really tough times. So you did an amazing job, Quinn. Thank you for stepping up and providing the questions and your insight. Really appreciate that. Going back to the panelists and having Kelley answer this next question is, formalized higher education may not be the pathway for everyone, for all our youth. What are some other avenues for success and achievement that you see for our future leaders?
Yeah. One thing I wanted to share is that with our work with the College Fund, we're progressing and slowly moving away from using the word success with our scholars, just because it has such a heavy definition and weight to it when you say success, right? Are you successful? What does success look like? And so we really are focusing on value. We use the word value is because we look at it in a sense of, what is your value? What is your value in community? What is your value in education? What is your value in family? Because I feel like, and I want to make sure that, of course, we want you to go to a higher education. We want you to succeed and to be on this panel and, in the future, and to be a role model for your family. But we understand that this may not be the course for you just yet. You know, I'd always want to say just yet, because you never know. Maybe in 5 years, you'll come back as a student. You know, with most of our tribal colleges, our average age that we're working with at the College Fund is around 32. So there's no timeline that you really need to fulfill. But once you get to that point in your life and you think about it, like, what is your value? What is your value in education that you want to find? Then I feel like, you know, you can look back and say like, oh, what is my value in my community or my family? So then either you'll look at your community and say like, how can I support my community? Working within your community. And when I say community, that can be a broad definition. Again, like we're saying, holding space for everybody because everyone's different, right? So your community could be like in the local city that I am in, Albuquerque, or my community can be with all my family in Arizona. So it's really up to you as an individual and the youth to see where you can find those different avenues. And you never know, working within your community or your family might lead you to being like, hey, I'm going to start my own business. So what does that educational look like? Or I want to work in politics. So then what does that educational look like? So there's always different paths that will lead you to it. And that's a key thing at the College Fund, is that we want to show you those supports. We want to provide those supports for you because you already have the key to do that as a person and as a Native and Indigenous person as well.
Tesia?
I love that response. Oh my gosh, Kelley, I'm going to marinate on that idea of using value instead of success. So I appreciate you sharing that. Prior to my current role, I got to establish our tribe's first education department. And that was a huge honor. And I did that sort of inspired by and empowered by my mother, who still is the director of the workforce development department at my tribe, the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. So I think tribes, of course, every tribe is different, but tribes are often at this cutting edge and really do understand that there are a lot of pathways for students, whatever their age may be, or whatever their goal may be for, their life after high school. So Vernon mentioned earlier his tribe's, program that they have put together. I know our tribe has vocational scholarships. They provide stipends to support students who are going to technical or trade schools. There's a lot of opportunities, whether it's college or whether it's vocational or trade, or there's even, I know at my tribe we have an organization that will fund a business, will help give applicants an opportunity to realize their entrepreneurial dream. So there are just so many opportunities. And I think for Indigenous folks, really seeing what your tribe offers, Quinn mentioned some of the resources that his tribe has now too. And I think really looking into that. And that doesn't have to be necessarily your tribe, depending on the nation and the strings attached to those grant dollars. Sometimes tribes can also serve other, any Native student that's within their jurisdiction or Native person within their jurisdiction, not just their own tribal citizens. So I think that's a really important thing to be aware of. And then I also, just thinking about STEM in particular, just want to really highlight the opportunities that there are, particularly with computer science. My goodness, so many people who are working in top tech jobs did not go to college. They taught themselves how to code, or they went to, a short training program. Some of these, which, ACES can help fund or help connect you to, but they are now succeeding in that field. And they did not take the pathway that I know I saw as the only way to reach that success whenever I was younger. So there are just so many beautiful versions of yourself that you could be once you identify for what that looks like. And it's, I think it's really exciting. So, miigwech.
Thank you. Vernon, what are some other suggested pathways?
Sure. So when I think about the community members, from my community back in Nebraska, and I really think about how the different journeys that my high school students who graduated, have taken. Some have gone on to the military. That's a pathway that our communities have really pushed and embraced. When you look at the per capita numbers, how many of our people have served are serving in the military per capita compared to other populations within this country. That's an avenue that can take you to higher ed, or a form of higher ed if you choose to do so after your service. And so that's a pathway that we can consider. Also the vocational pathway that we talked about earlier, through our career academy through K-12. If that's an opportunity that you are needing and wanting, look at other communities around you. The boarding school system is definitely an option for you to consider in terms of if there's a job corps nearby, what opportunities are going to be available, after some of those experiences. I also think about, what is success and achievement, for future leaders. And for me, I would define that as a level of not just independency, but interdependency. What does that look like for you, to be independent? What does it look like to be interdependent? How are we giving back, to our families? Because I always, reemphasize that, from our mind, since we've always been told to think about the we, think about how we're going to give back, how we're going to, our journey is going to impact, our family and our communities. So for me, it's really being mindful of there is no journey that you should take. It's really what's important to you. There's a lot of life experiences that we sometimes gain, in our younger years that, we're forced to grow up sooner. We're forced to deal with, all the socioeconomic issues that are impacting our communities. And so that calls for us to sometimes, really make decisions earlier than we'd want to. But enjoy your time with your family right now. Enjoy the ability to be with your grandparents, to be with your younger siblings, because whatever step you take after, the formalized K-12 education, it's going to look different for everybody. And, you're going to miss and you're going to reflect on those times and really, think about what you can do to give back in that way to your family. And also remember, what does that future look like for you? I'm excited with technology, how it's changing career pathways. I'm also excited for how we're really thinking more about our impact to the land. And we're seeing that more with climate change. And we're seeing a lot of that even more politically, how this country is becoming more divided, and how our future leaders that are going to be elected are going to make decisions that may impact, what our economies look like, what our sovereignty looks like. There's always an attack, from others on, who we are as a people, who our identity is. We talk about genocide happening across, this world, when we are also dealing with identity genocide here in this country. So think about, if those are issues that you care about, what can you do to impact those? What can you do in your journey to address some of those needs? Like I said, success and achievement looks different for everybody. Just know it will look different for you, but whatever is important to you, set goals, whether they're short-term and eventually long-term. That's really going to help you on your journey, what that looks like for you. So I wish you all well and what that may be. And know that you don't have to do the same thing your best friend or your cousin's doing. Everyone's journey looks different.
Lots of wisdom there. Dr. Tachine?
Yeah, I just want to echo Kelley's reframing of success toward values again, because I think that's really, really, really beautiful. Thank you for bringing that into the space. I've been lucky to also learn alongside tribal community members who've also been challenging the language around success, especially in education. It's often framed from graduating, getting a certain GPA, all these metrics that quite honestly were not created by us. And so what our tribal leaders and folks are saying is like, success is more of like to live a long and happy life, to feel healthy, to be joyful, right? And so those values that you shared, Kelley, are connected to that. So then when I talk to my own family, because I'm inspired by them, they're living a long and happy life, and they did not go to college, and that's okay. And I'll be honest with you, that's real hard for me because I've only gone to college. That's my only pathway. So for me, it's like, I feel like that's the only way. But then I've been learning from my husband, who's a pipe fitter and who's doing remarkably well and joined the union and is teaching me how, I don't know what he does. It's so fascinating. He's so smart and hard worker, has a strong work ethic, teaches us discipline. And then I looked at my younger sister, Hope Peshlakai, who opened up a restaurant in Mesa, Arizona. Come over and have some fry bread. It's called Hope's Fry Bread. My sister inspires me so much because she did not go, she tried college and it just didn't work for her. And she was a stay-at-home mom and always questioned herself. And then she learned how to start a restaurant on her own. And her husband have a successful restaurant now. And it's so, I'm like, thinking about it makes me want to cry. I'm so happy. And then last night, a story of my niece just received her esthetician. I don't know if I'm saying that right. She received that and she did facials for my mom last night because my mom's getting married this weekend. She came to our house and she put up her table. She knew all the science and she started her own thing. And I was like, so I'm learning alongside my family of there's so much things that's out there that we need that you can do that's beyond college. Now, I want you to go to college if that's in your rhythm. Like, I'm all about that. But I'm learning from my family, like my sister and my niece and my husband, that there's so many beautiful pathways that go. And it's okay to go on your own pathway. Living that long and happy, healthy life, that switching that framing that Kelley opened up to us is just really a good way to think about that. Then go. In Navajo means then go for it and keep going. And it's going to be hard, but you can continue. Like Vernon's all the good words he's telling us. I think it's possible. Anything is possible if you work hard on it and you pray. And I believe that wholeheartedly. And I've seen it with my loved ones.
Yeah, well, just doing a time check here, and I'll call Dr. Tachine to come back up and just answer the final question. And also, do you have any closing remarks? But powerful stories about your family. I just love it. I was moved on this side almost to tears myself. So thank you for that. As an entrepreneur, I could understand your sister's story. So how do you go about encouraging other philanthropy and nonprofit leaders to meaningfully engage with our tribal communities and youth in particular? And do you have any closing words for them?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm speaking to those folks who have funds and who are looking to fund initiatives. Let me be clear. Native communities are the least likely to get funded, and all accounts and research states that. That's a system issue. You can hear from the brilliance of our students who talked about their programs. All of these initiatives from the nonprofit world to larger organizations are doing amazing work. And so we need more resources to support and uplift that. Because when we're not funding, that is called erasure. That means erasing the brilliance of the first peoples of this place. Let me give you another statistic. We're talking about education. Native college enrollment has decreased for 15 years, and no one's ringing an alarm about it. That has long-term implications for our communities. So we need a bolstering of funds and support and alliance toward the remarkable work that we've shared tonight, and there's more out there, to not only uplift the educational levels of our community, but to give possibilities to restore what our community already have within their wisdom and their teachings. So please, I encourage you to learn more. There's knowledge all over the place. Social media is one. Look at your organization if you have funding. Look at the local tribes that are near you. What are the initiatives that there's something happening there? I guarantee you. And look at these larger organizations that we have here tonight. They are already trying to find funds to support Native youth. So we need your help. We need your support. And we would appreciate and we thank you for just being a part of this conversation and taking the time to do the next steps by building relationships and seeking support to help Native youth and communities to live for their futures of this great society. Thank you so much, the NAP, for this wonderful conversation. I'm excited and energized. It's going to carry me for days. And all of the panelists, It's been lovely to be alongside each of you. And I'm encouraged by the good work that you're doing for our communities.
Yeah, your enthusiasm is so contagious. Love it. Vernon, how would you go about encouraging other philanthropy and nonprofit leaders to engage with tribal communities and youth in particular? And do you have any final closing words for our folks?
For me, it's listen to their stories, listen to the histories that they are sharing, listen to the language, within the language alone really has a lot of complex societal things, creation stories in it. And also the most important thing as a potential funder or somebody who can invest is please make sure what you're investing in can be sustainable. As a former tribal leader, there has been so much investment into a lot of the communities around me, into our community through grants, but oftentimes those grants are limited or termed, and oftentimes don't seek out opportunities to be sustainable. So we make it a push of money or an opportunity to have this funding available right now. But unfortunately, after it runs out in 1, 2, 3 years, that funding goes away, and oftentimes programs or services go away with it. And so if you can, please listen to the community members, listen and find opportunities to make sure that your investment is sustainable, that it can be carried on, that it could also be, there's some continuity with reteaching the knowledge that's being hopefully gained, but also that's being passed down, that redistribution of that knowledge and that investment. I think that's what's going to have the most tremendous impact, is seeing that investment, coming back in 15, 20, 30 years and seeing that investment continued on to that time frame. So that would be my advice, is definitely listen to the youth, listen to the stories, listen to what's relevant for them right now. If you think about 10 years ago, we wouldn't have never known the pandemic was coming. We wouldn't have known how much that would impact our lives today. So be mindful of, what that looks like for today and how we can be mindful of what investment that's going to look like in the future. So thank you all also to the rest of the panelists. I enjoyed my time. I respect all of you and your experiences. I look forward to seeing your journeys progress, and also those that are listening and watching with us as well.
Great. Tesia?
Oh, absolutely. I was jotting down notes, and I'm just I'm so impressed and inspired by this panel, because I kept checking things off because I thought they covered that. I love the synergy. The one part that I want to highlight about this question is that meaningfully engage, and to me that really does go back to that relationship. You've got to build trust, and it needs to be a two-way relationship. So I know when I worked at the tribe, we would often have folks who would come to us and say, well, we're going to go after this grant. We'd love for you to be a part of it. Can you write a letter of support? But the application was already written. The scope of the grant was already determined. We weren't a part of deciding what our community needed and how best we could be involved. And, sometimes we would still go, be a part of those programs, but it always struck me that, and the successful examples of, if we were a part of that conversation sooner, if we were able, as Vernon was saying, if we were able to tell our stories and then the funding fits that, my goodness, what an impact, a bigger impact we could have together. So I really think that it has to be a relationship where both sides are building respect and trust, and the conversation continues after that, before the funding is even determined what the scope's going to be, during, and then after. And then the question is, what's next, right? And then I think, to just build on what was shared already, there's a lot of funds out there for startup programs. So, here we want this new innovative program and we're going to start it up. So that sustainability piece is important, but then also the operating piece. We have so many wonderful employees who work for ACES, and they've got the skill and the technical expertise to be able to serve our Native communities, but we need to be able to continue to fund them at their job. And so it's not as exciting often to say, we need operating expenses to fund our employees, but I can assure you, and I think if you look at the folks who are on this call and the organizations and institutions that they represent, that can be a really important way to impact communities too. And it does lend to that sustainability, and it's not so boxed into well, here's what your direct costs must be, and they have to be this brand new program. So there's just a lot of ways to think about that funding piece, but I'm so excited to have seen the comments coming through and see people on this call that are willing to listen. And I know that that conversation can shift within philanthropy. And I'm so grateful for Native Americans in Philanthropy for hosting this panel, to the fellow panelists for everything they shared and have inspired me to think deeply on. And I feel very, very full and grateful. So Igwien, heartfelt thank you for this opportunity.
Great. Thank you. Kelley?
Yeah, definitely want to support everything everyone has shared already. And this, I guess, one of my main points would definitely be, especially if you're working with an organization, you have an organization that you're working with, is visiting. Because visiting and knowing where students are coming from is a big thing. Whenever we do our site visits with our students, I always share with my team and be like, look at how long it takes you to get from a local airport to the city, then the city to the school, because that alone is a journey on itself. And so if anyone that wants to work with Indigenous youth, Native youth, the realities of their everyday life is essential to understand and to see where you're coming from in a community. So that's one main thing that I would say. And definitely, I'm not saying go out there, just go out there and knock on someone's door. But definitely work with an organization for sure. Because then there's a lot of opportunity out there, and there is a lot of need and support for students, and even schools as well too. So that's one my thing. And thank you again for this. It's been an amazing conversation, the panelists as well. So I enjoyed this very much.
Wow. I went to school today. Lots of delicious gems that were shared. I appreciate it. I feel with all of you in your roles in supporting our students that we're in really good hands, and just proud of you for all the work that you do. So thank you to each of our panelists. I mean, I'm going to think a little bit more about that whole question about how we use success and how we think about value instead. Lots of thinking to do, and have discussions with some of my colleagues and family and friends. So thank you for all of that. Thank you for being here and sharing your knowledge and wisdom. At this time, I will turn it over back to Danielle for the closing. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much to Steph and Kelley, Dr. Tachine, Vernon, Tesia, and Quinn. That was a delightful conversation, and I learned so much. We appreciate the audience and everybody who joined us and is on this learning journey with us. We appreciate the continued support in our ongoing programming, and in particular, your support for our award-winning member education session series. As a reminder, this session was open to the public as a highlight of our member benefits. NAP membership is open to Indigenous relatives and non-Indigenous allies. If you're not yet a NAP member and want to learn more, please visit our newly designed website, which is nativephilanthropy.org, or you can email Reina Davila Day at rday@nativephilanthropy.org. And for me, I'm really hoping that people take away a few things from this program. One is that the most important education doesn't always happen in the classroom, and the most important lessons in the classroom are built and informed by lived experience outside of the classroom. The things that, I have learned that have put me in the places that I am have mostly come from my grandparents, guest speakers coming into the classroom. Also wanting to give many thanks and kudos to the Native professionals working within the higher education department. That is what has saved me in going into college and into school, finding people who have the same experience as me. One Native counselor or professor or coach really can change the entire educational experience of many of our young people. And I would also like to really uplift and mention the programs that were that everyone kind of talked about, like Native Youth Grantmakers, ACES, the Career Ready Center, etc. All of these programs, you know, are so instrumental. I can speak from experience. They have changed my life. Growing up on the Hoopa Reservation, I was never, you know, in a family of people who had never gone to college. I never thought it was something that was kind of open to me. I never knew that the door to this life was something that I could walk through. And it took one Native professor to get me enrolled in college, to get me on the path that I'm on. So I'm so grateful to all of our people who join that space and who, you know, take that leadership. And I want to encourage everybody who's listening, you know, that now that we're learning, now that we're in this space talking together, it is now all of our responsibility to contribute to these programs. We heard the call for sustainable funding. We heard the call for, you know, continued partnerships. We heard the call for continuous support, for operating support. These are all very specific asks that are now our job as educated people to do what we can to contribute to. So I just want to say thank you one more time to everybody who joined. And I would also like to take this moment to remind everybody about NAP's upcoming annual conference later this spring. We will be convening April 22nd through 25th in Minneapolis, Minnesota. All NAP members and members of the general public are invited to attend. Registration is open, but I would recommend acting extremely fast as our tickets are limited and early bird pricing ends February 25th. If you aren't able to join us in person, please know that a curated, fully online experience is available. Please visit conference.nativephilanthropy.org to learn more about our conference and to register today. You will meet many of our amazing MAP members there, as well as many of our amazing Native Youth Grantmakers. We are so excited to share space with all of our partners, friends, and relatives, and we can't wait to see you there. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Set Diet. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I think that's all we have.